Welcome back to Alejandri Yamashta's and Martin Despang's show Urban Transcendence. I'm very, very happy to be back. I was gone for a quarter of a year back in Germany, in my home country, for the summer, and now I'm back, and it just feels perfect to be back. And before we start, I want to thank everyone that you guys have been so patient and understanding on all my international, intercontinental endeavors, especially the people here next to us in the next room, Zuri and Ian before, and Jay, of course. Thank you guys very much for putting up with your urban nomad. As well, I want to thank my host, my partner, Alejandri Yamashta, who many who watch the show know because she's by now omnipresent on ThinkTech Hawaii, both behind and before the camera, and she will actually also join her show now at the end of the month and being a host by herself, and then altering with me week by week. And last but not at all least, I want to thank my extended ohana, who whenever I was talking about our projects that were post-occupancy evaluating and evidence-based design assessing, then they were always a product of ohana, meaning my business partner and father, Mireille Turin, and my sister, dear sister, Cynthia Despang. So thank you guys all for putting up with that. Good news is we're back, so now no technical difficulties and all we had, so we're back here. So in coming back, the question was who's going to be our first guest after coming back. And of course, I wanted to make the transition smooth and get someone who would be the best for this show. And I found the perfect person for that, who's here with us today. And she is, the topic of today is called From the Mountains to the Trees. Obviously another title that should make people curious to tune in and to think what's behind that story here. So another title, working title we had could have been, that refers actually to next week's show, which is called Germany's Kaka'ako, Hamburg's Harbor City. We could have called this show here actually also Europe's Hawaii, because our guest today comes from a place in Europe that is sort of like that. And she is, but she's also here, she lives here, but she goes back, and we in fact came back at the same time, almost the same time. We've been gone for the same time. And so she's an intercultural citizen, and she's a local architect, she's an international architect, and her name is Mireille Turin. And so thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Martin. That's really very thoughtful.
You're welcome. So now lift the secret. What's that magic culture country you come from?
Well, originally I'm from Switzerland, and as you may have heard, Switzerland is also considered one of the more beautiful places in the world. And I guess in that respect, Hawaii and Switzerland have this sort of commonality of being considered very pristine and beautiful, and I'm very fortunate, obviously, to be part of both cultures now, and I've lived here now for my 11th year, and I feel very happy and, of course, very privileged to be here.
So which area in Switzerland you are from?
I grew up in the Swiss German-speaking area. My father and my grandfather, though, are from the French-speaking part. That's why my last name is also pronounced French. And since Switzerland is so small, everybody speaks a little bit of all the languages that are spoken there. So, yeah. And I grew up in this little town, and then I studied in Zurich, which is about the same size than Honolulu in terms of population, but a little bit smaller in terms of footprint. And yeah, it's a very nice place to live at.
And you got mountains there. This is why I drew from, basically. And also we want to get to that there's a certain perception of Switzerland, and there's a certain reality, and they're both sort of differences maybe between the two. We get to that later. The second part of the title of the talk today, so From the Mountains to the Trees, has also to do with that we're most aware what day today is. It's 9/11, and so this is a memorable day for everyone in the world, for America in particular, for us not being from here also has many sides. With you as a guest, we have the excellent opportunity that besides obviously, memorizing the day and thinking of the day, you're a good example for that. For some of us, all of us have a memory of that day because we were somewhere, of course, and you shared with me where you were, and I was actually in a subway at that time when it appeared on the screens. But in your case, it has a very sort of a positive outcome, so not the event itself, but the timing, and it also relates to the second part of the title of the show, to the trees. So what's that with the trees?
Well, it as you were mentioning, this date has a sort of a bittersweet connotation to me, of course, because of the tragedy that happened, of course, in New York. But it was also the day the day before that, my partner Peter Segrist and I learned that we won this treehouse competition for treehouses in Hawaii, and it was at night, the night before 9/11, and so we decided we wanted to celebrate the next day. And of course, we didn't hear about the whole tragedy until late in the afternoon because of the delay, the 6-hour delay, and it was such a surreal scenario, and of course we weren't really able to celebrate, but basically what we wanted to celebrate was that we won this treehouse competition, and it was really amazing thing, of course, and it also really changed my life, obviously, because I'm now here. So
you're very happy to have you here.
Nobody would have thought. I mean, it was the weirdest coincidence. So.
Well, it's very specific about Hawaii. That's the most intercultural place, and the majorities here, the minorities. So again, Europeans are a minority here, and I guess Swiss and German are even a minority in the minority. So it makes us, I guess, special to be here. And before that, you said you went to school in Switzerland, in Zurich. We should not forget to say that's one of the most prestigious institutions you could go to school to. It's the ETH, the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule. I don't know if we should probably say, can you say something in your native language? Lass uns einfach mal ein paar Worte.
Oh ja, also in Schweizerdeutsch,
ja, bitte schön.
Da merkt man wie unterschiedlich wir zwei reden, oder? Also, obwohl wir beide eine Art des Deutsch reden, ist es natürlich eine ganz andere Geschichte.
Das ist wahr. Du kannst ja in beiden Dialekten schön sprechen.
Ja, ich kann dann auch Hochdeutsch sprechen, weil, because our language, our dialect is actually not a written dialect. It's more like Pidgin in a certain way. So I feel very, have a good affinity for Pidgin because I realize it sort of grows out of another culture, and you just try to do your own thing with it. And I think Swiss German in that sense, as it already sort of indicates, is this kind of Pidgin that derived of the German language.
So thanks for switching back to so that the audience can follow us better. But it gave them a good idea that yes, we speak the same base of the language, but there's significant difference. And I have to admit that if you're really hardcore going to your dialect, I have a hard time picking up everything. So it's quite interesting. So the ETH is, again, whoever knows about architecture school, it's one of the high tier institutions that many consider one of the best in the world, actually. So it's a very prestigious institution. And after that, you actually worked in several functions. You also worked for the public sector, basically, and you were organizing and orchestrating architectural competitions that we maybe should get to after later. But then there was this sort of really sort of magic shift of you coming from sort of a very traditional setting environment, one of the cultures and countries that most people in the world, it's a paradise for them in a different way. In fact, even here I tune on the radio and there's a commercial about Swiss cheese, and they're going on and on and on and on. So it's something that, there are many things of the Swiss culture that are known and appreciated all over the world. But the grass is greener on the other side, I think pretty literal here. You had maybe explained a little bit more sort of which you shared with me before the show, that you said it was in winter and it was November.
Oh, the way that I came here, you mean? Yeah. So we got invited to come to Hawaii, and both Peter and I were like, I don't know, we're both very urban people. We didn't really have this sort of leisure temperament in us, and we thought, Hawaii is this paradise and everybody's at the beach, and we're like not part of that whole scene. So So eventually it turned out that only I was able to come here, and it was also really, everything was serendipitous, because at that point the Swiss official airline just tanked and went bankrupt, and I was able to procure a really cheap ticket, and so I just was opportunistic in a certain way, and just flew out to Hawaii, and it was December, so I got into Kahului, that was the island I was invited to, Maui. And I got off at 8 o'clock in the night, and I was just dumbstruck, because I was not aware that this is the climate that would welcome me. And I think that was probably the most important shift in my perception that I had at that point. And it just made me realize that I needed to do something different in my life. You mentioned earlier that Switzerland, has certain traditions, and maybe one of the traditions that are maybe not so public or so is that I think you can get born in Switzerland and you live all your life in Switzerland, and everything is pretty much clear. There is no struggle. There's almost no struggle, or maybe I'm just feeling privileged, I'm not sure, but I felt like there's nowhere at any point a situation where I felt out of control or something like that. And I realized since I'm here that I have to be much more adaptive, and I think that's also an interesting terminology in for our profession, that we really gotta make sure that we adapt ourselves, but also adapt our buildings to the local situation. And I really appreciate the fact that I'm living here now, and that I'm more exposed to these uncertainties of life, and it's a really great experience. It can make you be very happy, but then you can also come down at a certain point, but there's a little more spice, let's put it that way, to the life. So.
And then maybe it gets us, if Zuri, if you can hear me, Zuri, if you can help us out with a camera, that we maybe show a couple of the impressions of your project, because everything you just very poetically explained about your motivation, your agenda is sort of embodied in your work. And I think the treehouse is a perfect sort of pioneer in your work to that degree. So maybe you can start verbally, and maybe I can hold it up. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I guess the design approach for this particular brief was that I explained to you earlier that I'm somebody that's like always carrying a lot of thoughts in my mind, and it's kind of like it takes a while to sort of bring it to paper, and it was a similar situation with this project. But I knew that treehouses are something that are almost everybody's concerned with them at some point in life, and it's some kind of magic idea to have a treehouse and have this new perspective on your life and on the surroundings. And I also like to sort of like bring together principles, I guess, structural principles, and think about them, transforming them, making something new out of them. And at some point I knew that I wanted to do, because it was about palm trees, which I learned only briefly before, that they can be replanted and actually thrive in their new environment, which I've been told from early on that never move a tree, it's going to die.
True for the Swiss trees.
Yeah,
right.
so that there you see the cultural differences. And so I had this idea of just using the technology of an umbrella, pretty much. Like we usually use it, for to cover ourselves from rain.
To this camera here.
And so you see the structural idea here to actually inverse the system of an umbrella and then wrap it around the tree trunk and make this the base, and then just loosely let the a drop cloth fall around it, and just make it also so you can lift it up like a skirt in a little bit, and just let the air flow through it. And we, out of I think 520 or something international competitors, we won this competition. Not least, I think, because of our suggestive renderings that we presented, and I think that's one of the major methods of communication for architects, that we make this suggestive rendering that lets people think and dream and imagine things.
And isn't that the way? I mean, it's almost like embodying like how we should all live here in Hawaii. We should all have, and you explained that the tree houses you know, they can actually be nested in trees and connected to trees, but you can also clip them to almost like laundry lines somewhere in a high-rise, right? So we would all like parasite in nature here and just, you know, be easy breezy out there and let, you know, be in touch with the elements, still yet protected from them. So it's a really beautiful kind of and we should, the very nice and humble person you are, you kind of start with your own very impressive sort of portfolio, but we should also share with the audience that this project got into some pretty significant, serious international publications here. This is one of the books here called Treehouses, and even better, there's another one which you made the title of the book. Right. So this is some really, really serious, you know, peer review, as we call it. At this point, I should say, and you made a comment about that, we also know each other from teaching. I call us practicators, which is that strange hybrid of a practitioner and an educator. So this is really good stuff that's recognized in our, I guess, the part, especially the educator, that once your work gets acknowledged by peers, it's high end. So this is kind of serious stuff that kind of informs. And another thing you have laid out here, which you actually showed the students last semester when we taught, and that's in this book here.
This is an amazing photo I found. Actually, a friend of mine gave me this book to use for my parents when they were visiting, just to show them some sites. And I found this picture from 1957 that was shot of Waikiki. And because we had this topic in our studio that we wanted to do this scenario of 2050 Waikiki, and so, you know, thinking about the climatic changes that will happen, the sea level rise that we incorporated, we thought this is one of the very few times where you could actually make this tabula rasa approach to a situation, because if everything is flooded 3 feet, you know, you might as well recreate a view of and a feeling of Waikiki like most people would want it to see. And when I showed this photo to my parents and my siblings, they were like, "Oh my God, this is so beautiful. Why is it not like that anymore?" And that just made me, you know, show it to the students. And we said, you know, think about this, and you know, if people want to come to the island and they want to experience paradise, you got to give them what they desire. And I think, for as cheesy as it sounds maybe, but palm trees and beach are still a very huge attractor. And I think also urbanistically, this has of course a huge potential to have this canopy of palm trees that creates this intermediate layer. And we were talking about just having some, you know, needle-like high-rises sticking out of it, just like another tree level or another forest level sticking out of the real forest. So I mean, there's a lot of potential that could be deducted out of this kind of scenario.
That's great. Yeah. So we want to hear more. We take a short little commercial break, and then we're going to be back with our guest today, Mireille Turin, and her exciting topic about from the mountains to the trees.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech digital series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us, and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
So we're back with our guest, Mireille Turin, and her topic of From the Mountains to the Trees. So we're with the trees now, and you just pointed out it's your favorite picture, and I'm using it ever since, and you know, referring to, crediting to you, to the students actually in my current studio where we just did a walkie-texture trip through Waikiki, experiencing the urban jungle, the heat island effect, the noise, and so your vision of sort of reconnecting to the past, which you said, we recently I think we're backed up with our feelings about that we love this place, that we're privileged to be, but also very worried about it. And I'm glad you shared that there are these, you know, ups, these feelings. When I came back, I had the same, you know, everything gets to me, and all the senses, you know, and the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the next couple of days, I really go down. I kind of tank because
Mm-hmm.
I see how kind of disrespectfully we treat
Mm-hmm.
what we have.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
we pollute, we have traffic that's congested. It's just like shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
whenever you propose something new and radical, you're called a visionary or a
Mm-hmm.
dreamer or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But I think what you're pointing out to is actually sort of an own tradition that
Mm-hmm.
that used to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
And why not bringing this back?
Mm-hmm.
And to your back to your great treehouse competition winning, you also pushed that further and developed it further. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was just what you mentioned after that, you know, we all pretty much would like to live in a more liberal environment or like in a tree-like environment. And we thought that just confining this design idea to palm trees is a little too limiting. So we developed another stage, which was basically an inflatable treehouse, which looks a little bit like this here. That's a rendering from, you know, I don't know, ages ago. So you see the Macintosh still has the label, the apple upside down when you open the lid of the computer. So that's how old this is. So basically this was an idea to just have it hanging from any kind of vertical, you know, thing, whether it be a mountain or, you know, a ledge over a mountain or something like that. So I think this was actually adapted very recently by Dedon, the outdoor furniture manufacturer that does these woven basket type of things, and it looks really nice. I think it's a good thing.
It would have been even nicer if they would pay you copyright fees frequently.
Oh well. But you know, maybe coming back to something you also talked about, the whole tree idea. I remember very early on when I was privileged to teach at UH before you were here, I talked to the students and we went outdoors and we realized, you know, I gave them the task, like, where's the most comfortable place to be at, you know, and of course everybody eventually gathers under the tree and realizes that is the most comfortable place to be at on the islands pretty much, and it creates this interesting microclimate. It creates a little breeze automatically, even if there's no breeze whatsoever in the sun. And so I think trees are a really important part of my life, obviously now. And I think, you know, we could be much more outdoors on bikes and things and walking if there were more trees, obviously, and we wouldn't have to get a car with air conditioning to kind of like go about town. So that would be something I would really you know, put my efforts in, especially when I first came from Switzerland. I never had a car before, and I was always riding a bike, and it was really foreign to me to I mean, actually have to purchase a car, and I still don't know anything about cars, so I'm hopeless. And but I'm very happy that there seem to be now more people, young people that are, and older people as well, actually, that are riding bikes. But it's still not ideal, I think, in terms of traffic and stuff like that.
Or you're in a good place here because Jay is actually one of the early initiators of more bicycle Honolulu, and we definitely have to go back to that.
Yeah.
And also, you're very familiar with this environment because you also worked in the area of TV production. Maybe you want to share that background a little bit?
Actually, when I graduated from ETH, there was a little bit of a doldrum in architecture. There's not much going on. We had a mayor at that time. She proclaimed that the city is built, which, you know, now in hindsight is a total joke because Zurich is like increased by like 3 times or something. It's really grown a lot. But at that time, it was not much. There was not much going on. And after a stint in England, I came back and I started to work at Swiss Television, first as a set designer and then as an art consultant. And I really enjoyed this stint a lot because it gave me insight into a new profession that you know, gives you a lot of interesting new background information. And so that's always helpful to know many different things and not just focus on one little item. And I think actually our profession, we are generalists, and so it's always an interesting challenge to learn about something new and to think about the new program and try to come up with ideas and solutions to create something interesting for other people, of course.
Definitely. No, very diversified background, and Jackie of all trades, how America starts to rediscover that that's the way to go and not the nerdy way.
Yeah.
So along your path of, multiple, ways and winding roads, there was one that impresses me a lot because he's one of the architects in the world that I respect the most. And in fact, I was another analogy, or coincidentally, he was a mentor of mine in a competition because he was a juror.
Oh, wow.
And basically was convincing Billy Chin, who was a little worried about me applying materials too much as surface, and he, together with Fuchsas and Peter Davy at that time, convinced her that it was okay. So I'm talking about David Chipperfield, who I think is a wonderful architect, who I call a poetic rationalist, and that's debatable, but I know that you have some sympathy for that interpretation.
Of course, yeah.
So you were with him, and you were a designer and an architect with him.
Yeah.
And I think with that, probably the audience says, well, she's a great dreamer, but, if I'm, potentially a client, would I go with Mireille, who has great dreams? But so the audience should look at David Chipperfield, who is an awesome architect and is building all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
Has a large body of work in America as well, which pretty close to where I was in the Midwest. There's a Figge Art Museum, there's Davenport. And then there's the Moines Art Center, and there's other projects.
Yeah.
So you have developed and you have grown as well, and have, without losing your roots. And I want to point out that there's a project that I want you to talk about that many people would consider to be real architecture, and which I think the treehouse is as real as you can get.
No, but it's a fantasy, like you're pointing out, and it's a dream that I think a lot of people share with me, and so I actually, before, of course, I worked with Swiss Television. I had to emigrate, because there's not much going on in Switzerland, but what was going on at that time was there was a lot of guest architects presenting their work in the Architekturforum at that time, and amongst others was David Chipperfield, and at that time he was a very small office still. It was the early 90s, and I was really taken away with his poetic approach. He did a lot of Joseph stores, he did Miyake stores, and the way that he talked about mostly interior spaces that he did was just really poetic, and I just kept pestering him. I called him, I sent my resume, and I just kept insisting until he finally called back, like probably out of sheer, like, oh, let me get rid of her once and for all. So he asked me to come to London, and we were like, this really small office, basically. I think we were like 8 people working there, and it was really intimate place in Camden. I think he's probably now, I don't know how many people he has, but he must be hundreds, So we had a very intense intensive exchange, and I worked on his river and rowing museum at Henley, and it's funny actually, now that I think about it, it has a lot of Polynesian and Swiss
that one has
things, because it's pole house, so that kind of reminds me of Swiss, old Pfahlbauten in on the lakes in Switzerland that were out of the Iron Age, I guess, whatever you call that in English, and then it had this kind of slanted shaped roof that is a more Polynesian thing. And
you want to show that red? I just call it, to simplify, that red house.
Oh yeah, that's kind of.
This is interesting. That might have actually been informed by that, right?
Yeah, now that you talk about it,
I guess so. Now it all comes out.
So now that I think about it, maybe
this
I'm
is
just
actually
emulating
a therapeutic session here.
So this was a project I developed with an architect friend here, Don Shaw, and he asked me to help him with developing a site down in Kulamanu Street. It's an end lot right on the beach, and it had this kind of odd shape. Maybe here on the floor plan you see the kind of shape that I came up with to sort of respect the setbacks and everything. And I tried to make this combination of sort of like a rigid, like an architecturally really rigid shape with this sort of Polynesian touch to it, and I also was always interested in you know, making a comfortable living environment, and so that was in 2004, I think, and we decided I wanted to make a pool indoors that would, you know, cool the building down.
Section, I think, as well.
Yeah, and then with that roof, of course, it lets the air go through with these vertical fins that are the facade and everything, so everything would just flow through that building as if it was a tree, pretty much. It's an analogy of a tree, and but it's very rational in its approach, and I kind of like this combination of, you know, that's part of who I am, is this person that came out of Switzerland, ETH, and so forth, but I like to meld it and with, you know, things that I pick up that become important to me when I'm here. I mean, I would never build or design a house like that in Switzerland. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's a different animal altogether.
I think in all, very respectfully, it's actually it's an evolvement of the local building tradition. I mean, the local building tradition has been very rational. I mean, how to put posts and sticks together and basically, you know, and thatching is very rational. And because it's so rational and it's so logic, it's actually perceived as beautiful, sort of retrospectively. Now, nostalgically, people go to the Polynesian Cultural Center and they say, "Oh, that's neat." Well, it's neat because it makes sense. So I think very much it's not a formal approach. It's not about the surface. It's about the substance and how things work.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important topic to me, and I always try to instill that into, you know, my educator's hat. And I always try to make students aware of indigenous and vernacular architecture, why something develops in a certain climate, and because it has certain elements that you can actually build with. And we had this interesting class one time. It was called Low-Tech Construction, High-End Design, and it's really about that, filtering out what is there initially and what can you use as a building material and as a construction method, and then how can you transform it into something beautiful. And I think that's, I guess, every architect's purpose in life, to make something work, but also make it beautiful.
Yeah, but you do that very well, better than many others, and we want to talk about that after one last break. So see Mireille Turin back in a minute.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
So welcome back for the last quarter of an hour with our guest, Mireille Turin, and her topic today, From the Mountains to the Trees. And this is sort of the concluding part of the show, so we're going to talk a little bit more about everything, as we always do, but also about a house in the mountains, in the Hawaii, Oahu, Manoa Mountains, which is very much like a tree, but is more, for, you know, conventionally looked at as more a house. Tell us about that one.
Well, thank you. I was really lucky to have met my clients that originally came from South Africa, and they were showing me their house that is in Manoa, and it was an old A-frame home that they wanted to add 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, which I diligently did, and it turned out that because it's an A-frame, it was very difficult to add to it, and the contractors, they just came in with ridiculous bids, and it was so high that I told them, listen, I can design you a new home that will be cheaper than adding 2 bedrooms and 1 bath to your home, and they went with it. And I had the most amazing experience with these clients, because what they told me, and I'm not lying here, they said, whatever makes you happy makes us happy.
Wow.
And I have to tell you, I've never had that before, but what it does to an architect-client situation is that the architect just does everything for this client to make them happy, because it's so generous, and it was not just said like that, but they really let me, you know, run with it, as you say. And I think I understood their program. They were expecting a baby. They wanted to raise a family, and they really had not enough room to do that in their existing home. And it was a very limited and very steep lot. I mean, very small front and very steep. And I tried to minimize the footprint, but also maximize the livable area. And I did that by sort of creating this cube that I just carved out sections, so that from every room, you actually, even from the room in the backside, through a window enfilade, you will see the view. I mean, it's really, the view is really amazing. And before the new home, they actually had no view of their beautiful valley whatsoever. And so, yeah, even though the footprint is only 30 by 30 feet, it has a feeling of being much larger, because you have huge visual axes and visual enfilades. And maybe we can show some of these impressions here. And also the clients who were they're having a little bit of a financial, let's say, a tight spot there, and it turned out that creating flat roofs was actually less expensive than having a steep roof or a thatched roof or whatever you want to call it. And even better, it created more space for them. So they have a lot of lanai space now, and also before they had no outdoor space whatsoever, and now they have like multiple different level outdoor spaces in their home. And
I really hope, you know, my students, our students, watch the show, you know, because they can learn a lot from you. And I think it's amazing. My next assignment, my current studio, is actually the current one is copyrighted by you, because it's manga. We talk about that next. But the second one is demonstrated by you, because you're basically showing the inside-out approach, versus usually when people would be here and they would show a house, you would see the house from the outside, say this is my house. So it would be about the form. But here so it really proves you're about the space, and you're about the views. And that basically results in the form, yes. And we're going to share and show that later. But that's, I think, a very healthy approach. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely was inoculated like this through ETH. I mean, it was the worst thing if you created something that was formalistic. I mean, they would just slash you right there. And I also believe, like, things get their shape out of their genetic program, and I believe a building is a sort of a genetic footprint of the family or the client or whatever the entity is that will inhabit or, you know, live there or do whatever. And so for me, it's important to understand what their needs are, and then combine these needs with what the site offers. And this place, because it's the last road on the Diamond Head side of Manoa, it has spectacular views, and you see Mauka as well as Makai, and now they have like views from literally every room that they have, and it feels really very airy, and it has all natural ventilation, and it really works fortunately very well, and they're really happy, I think. So.
And for me, actually, you don't. This is interesting and surprising. Well, you have one here, but I want to point out that Zuri is nicely also showing your website on on the screen. So the audience should please go, as they're curious now, and go. And you have wonderful pictures, actually also of the exterior of the house, so people can see how it is. And I think, you know, it's this perception that nature is nature and architecture is architecture, but both have their own systems and principles. And so when you, as much as, you know, in the tradition of Chipperfield, you don't have to use the same principles. Maybe you shouldn't. You should use the one that we have, and maybe we are more about rectilinear forms than organic forms, which doesn't mean there isn't good architecture that uses organic forms. But in your case, you know, I consider this building being a perfect treehouse, even though most people would say, well, it doesn't look like a treehouse because it's, you know, it doesn't look like a tree, but it feels like being in a tree when you're in there. And it's also that balance between light and shade, between opacity and transparency, between porosity, and all these things are basically incorporated into the architecture.
And I talking about maybe the exterior, since we're in Manoa, and I knew that there's a lot of rainfall, obviously, and their lot is situated sort of like northwest, so there's not too much exposure, but a little. So we decided to use this roof membrane that usually is used on roofs, and I just put it on all the exterior surfaces to create almost this like raincoat, and it was very inexpensive, of course, but it also makes the building look more cubic in its approach. And but I wanted, because it had this modern form, obviously that didn't really fit with all these A-frame homes up there, and I didn't want to be this contrast and make it white like a Corbusian villa. I thought I'm going to keep it really dark so it sort of melts into the background, and it literally does. I sometimes when I go up there and visit, I just look if I can see the home, and I don't, and I'm really happy about that because it's sort of like very modest, I think, and it's also. I just like the way that it melts into the landscape, and
I think that's a perfect continuation of Hawaii architecture. You know, that always blended in because you talk about materials, and it's a perfect example. We have in more industrialized materials. We have code, so we have to use membranes. We can't use thatched anymore. So the roof membrane, which you know from our another similarity analogies, our office home in Munich that has been on the show, that uses the same kind of thing, which is to show the Tyvek and use a black one. You know, just show what you have and don't hide and don't show more than you need. There's another home here, case study that's called the bioclimatic.
Yeah, that was a design that evolved out of a studio that I did, the one that I mentioned earlier. It's called the low-tech construction high-end design, and I thought one of the materials that is age-old is earth. Yeah, so rammed earth is an age-old building material and construction method, and I thought that Hawaii has extremely good soil to do something like this, and so that's the basis of this design, to create this totally autonomous design for Hawaiian homelands, even off any kind of what you call city or city, sewer and things like that. But it takes care of everything. It catches the water on the roof, and gravity will feed it into your plumbing, and everything is very thought out in a sense that it's very simple to construct. It just needs manpower, and so I'm always interested in that as well. I mean, before we didn't have machines, so we needed to just rely on our own strength, and what can you do if you have this kind of limiting parameters, and I think it's interesting too to have the students realize we can do something with very little effort, but it creates a very nice result, and it creates a nice environment for the
very
people.
Much so, yeah. So will you explain a little bit what the manga is, since I threw it out?
Yeah, so sometimes it's interesting to figure out how do you best come up with a narrative for your building, or how do you best convey what the building is all about. And we had this situation in our studio where we thought about how can we get the students to come up with this futuristic idea of what is going on in 2050 in Waikiki, and I thought, because it's in the future, and manga, of course, is sort of this sort of futuristic communication method, or this kind of, fantasy novel thing, that the students might respond to this method, and they really did, and of course, because I think they also are readers, and they like mangas, and it was really amazing how it seemed much more easier for them to come up with an idea of the environment, how the spaces feel, the public spaces, the semi-public spaces and the private spaces, much easier than if they would actually have to draw sections, elevations, and perspective renderings. So I thought it was a really interesting new method for us to experience if it worked. Of course, everybody's always nervous if you try something different, and it was a very nice experience for us, I guess.
Just like with your roof membrane as the facade material, that's an experiment, and you gotta experiment, and only through experimentation you figure out new things that basically make you evolve and kind of learn. So again, School of Architecture, our collaborator was David Rockwood as well. We should mention him. And we had a great semester, and your manga experiment became the big highlight of that semester. All the other studios were like looking and saying, "Wow, this is a different approach. This is actually sort of deriving architecture from human event and activity that gets spatialized, and that only becomes form at the very end. And you live that and teach it, in reciprocity. That's great and wonderful."
No, I mean, I have to say this was really the most interesting semester with the two of you, David and Martin. I mean, it was just a very good combination, and I think the students hopefully really learned a lot. We try to share whatever we know, and that's all we can do as educators, I think, and really be passionate about our own profession and
return the favor, and the pleasure was on our side. Hope we get you back to school. The students will be lucky to have you back and benefit from your kind of intercultural, fresh view on things, going back over the summer, having been there, looking at your own European Hawaii, different, and then coming back, and there's this reciprocity of influences and sharpening of awareness. And being critical, I think, 9/11 is a critical event. So that's today, we memorize that. And I think critical thinking is what you always expect everyone, and the most from yourself. And you give you a hard time, as I know, which I credit you for. And you ask for that no matter with who works with you. If it's a student, if it's your client, it's communication and it's critical thinking. So that's really great. So I think when you were crediting your clients, and you were basically saying, these were ideal clients because they gave you the freedom, they trusted in you. And then I was thinking about our theme of trees, obviously, and that the saying that money doesn't grow on trees, and clients don't grow on trees. But I think if anyone can make clients grow on trees, it seems you can do that. Because it's just like, I think Hawaii really needs you, and I wish you all the best for the future, that many clients, potential clients watch the show and commission you and go with you the path. And so I think you're an incredible asset to the island, very much in the tradition of the pioneers that have been here, in the early days, like Pete Wimberly, like, Vladimir Osipov, who is doing the same approach. I mean, Bob Lillerstrand well. You have actually lived with them for many years, and that was up in the valleys, and so I'm sure that informed you a lot. And although your treehouse, Manoa treehouse, doesn't look anywhere like the Lillerstrand house, but they're based on the same principles, and yours is here and now, and Osipov's was way back then. So I think you're in the best tradition of these great architects who actually have not been from here, right? They came from somewhere else, but they were so sensitive and sensible towards the local, and they felt privileged to be here, and so that's what they did, was very responsible. So
well, it is definitely a privilege to live here and work here, and it's amazing, to do architecture in this perfect climate, and of course we want to do it right, and we want to create buildings that are not energy consumptive, but actually, use very little, if at all, energy. And I think Hawaii is such a privileged place that could live almost without any, or should be able to live without any oil or, using so much energy. That would be a goal, I guess, that people that are in that profession will take up and run with hopefully soon.
Well,
And
I think
we can do whatever we can do, of course.
you're a key element. You have demonstrated that you can do that. And yeah, keep up the great work.
Thank you very
We
much.
hope to have you back on the show. On the way here, maybe we share with the audience that this show should be about a lot that has to do with the built environment. So on a macro down to a micro scale. And we came up with something that got us so excited. We talked about that all the time, and we want to keep it a little bit of a secret, but maybe that little bit, it has to do with something that we all use. We can't get around it.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of philosophical background, and so it will add to the sort of the building components, part of this show. So we don't share more because we want to keep the audience excited, but we get you back for that one for sure.
All right.
And also I think for other topics, because there's so much stuff we couldn't talk about, and one can talk to you and never get tired for
Thank
days.
you. Same
And
here.
So it's
Same
always
here.
been the
Well,
case.
thanks again
And
for
so-
inviting me. It was really a privilege.
Yeah.
Appreciate
All
it a
right.
lot.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and yeah, keep up the great work. I hope we can get you back to school once we have consolidated things, because I think education is key, as you say. You educate your clients, you educate the students,
Yeah.
you educate the public. I think that's I guess probably the biggest challenge we have, that we're so fragmented here, and this is a great outlet. This is a great forum to get the word out, and we should get this more. So that's something that we say we both want to work on, to somehow spread the word more, go more out, get people up to see the treehouse in Manoa. It's for me. I mean, it took me a while, to be honest, to know that it's there, and because you're so humble and so nicely understated, you don't run around and say, I did one of the greatest houses in Manoa, which it is. So I guess we somehow got to get over our sort of culturally ingrained kind of humbleness, which Hawaiian culture knows about, because they're basically the same. So I guess we share the same kind of dilemma to that degree, that in a culture that's so consumer oriented and so commercialized, where it's all about branding of things, And so let's try to find ways to give that more exposure, I think, to really get the message to the people.
Okay.
So again, thank you very much, Mireille. As always, a pleasure, and thanks for sharing with the audience. And thank you, and have you back.
Okay.
All right. So thank you very much for having been with us. Next week, Zuri just confirmed it's going to be the one that I mentioned already, Germany's Kakaago, Hamburg's Harbor City, and after that will be Alejandra Yamashita with a surprise guest of hers. So thank you very much for being with us, and it's great to be back.